The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
And Representative Walden, if we could start this Communicators with a discussion about the spectrum auctions. If you could give us an update on where you stand, where you see them standing. We've heard 2014 they may begin, 2015. How do you see it?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's great to join you and be back. I do not underestimate the difficulty of doing this auction because it's never been done before. We've never done a reverse and forward auction. It's very complicated. There are a lot of moving parts, and I know they're working diligently at the FCC to get it right. Our job at the Communications and Technology Subcommittee is to make sure that they're adhering to the law, that we're in a constant communication so that our intent is clear, that we want as much of this spectrum made available for sale in the auction as possible, and so that we can build out more wireless infrastructure in the private sector. There's obviously been a lot of discussion about the initial band plan and the most recent one that came out, and there are puts and takes and gives back and forth. And the industries, ironically, even the cellular industry, the wireless industry, and the broadcasters are actually together on some points, and usually they're at each other's throats. And so they've got some work to do yet, I think, to get the broadband plan, the auction, the band plan, and the incentives in place so that it works. But I don't underestimate the challenge they face.
Well, you've expressed some reservations about how the DOJ is viewing the rules, the implementation of the rules.
Right, and as you know, we sent a letter back to DOJ clarifying and hopefully enlightening them about how the spectrum process works, how the Congress views this, and I think we made ourselves pretty clear. Look, this is important work. Enormous numbers of jobs in America come from innovation and technology from this sector. We want to make sure broadcasters know, and the FCC and DOJ know, that this is a voluntary auction, and we mean voluntary, and that it gets set up in a way so you have maximum number of participants and maximize the revenue available. Because our build out of public safety broadband interoperable network depends upon that. The money that was already spent to pay for the Middle Class Jobs Act and the tax cuts and things already spent depends on us raising it now through the auction and just getting the policy right. And what I don't want to see, and what I was disturbed about with some of the most recent examples, is that they're once again sort of leaning toward freeing up more of the spectrum that gets cleared, taxpayers pay to clear, or somebody pays to clear, and then giving away in the unlicensed world. And that's not something that I'm a big fan. I'm for unlicensed. We make a lot of it available, and there's more available than probably licensed in different bands. But this beachfront property, the really valuable property we're freeing up, is really best suited for cross-country communications and not localized. So.
And finally, on spectrum, what about the issue of FirstNet? Are you pleased with the efforts that are going forward in that area?
I'm cautious on the efforts going forward. I'm concerned to make sure that the states are appropriately represented, that the law enforcement and fire public safety community is appropriately represented. It's disturbing when one of the FirstNet board members who comes out of the public safety community is pretty upset about how things are happening. Now, his is not a majority voice, but his is an important voice. As you may or may not know, when we did our oversight hearing on FirstNet, I raised some concerns about the person that eminently qualified CIO, having been there in a couple of states, now works for the federal government. She's the representative for states. Now, it's like saying, that a different company is going to represent yours on a board because you once were there. Well, it's not the same. And so I wish states had a bigger role here. But we're going to watch it. I think they're running into some of the obstacles we thought they would, and some of our proposal in the House was more to maximize the local infrastructure that's available, the assets that are available, and build up from there. What ended up in the law really was more a top-down approach. But I think they're finding that has its own set of problems, especially when it comes to allocating costs. We had a witness from Virginia that talked about the potential cost back on local fire departments and all that would be, I don't know, double, triple. It was a huge increase over their existing budget, and they're like, I don't know how we'd afford to do this. So we got to make sure they get it right. And that's part of our due diligence, by the way, as a committee. You don't just pass a law and walk away.
Also joining our conversation is Tony Rahm of Politico.
Thanks for having me. I want to speak a little bit more about spectrum auctions. You know, when the Congressional Budget Office did its assessment of the spectrum law, they came back with that figure that said more than $20 billion of revenue from incentive auctions. And as you pointed out, some of that money went towards paying for the Middle Class Jobs Act. Some of it has gone for FirstNet. Are you still holding the FCC to that number, or is that number now a little bit unlikely? Is this too inflated to expect more than $20 billion?
I don't think we really know, Tony, at this point. But I think what we do know, I think this is correct, that in the past, the Congressional Budget Office's estimates of the value of spectrum usually undershot what actually happened in an auction if it's designed properly. Now they had an auction failure on I think the old D block and all in the past. So you got to get it right. That's why we're spending our time focused on making sure the FCC gets the auction set up correctly. If they do, then I think the opportunity there is there to achieve higher revenue. As you know, some at the FCC wanted to, at least it felt like, preclude some of the bigger players, AT&T, perhaps Verizon, from participating in the auction or really restrict them at the head end. I fought back on that. They've got the ability at the backside, and we pointed this out to Department of Justice in that letter too, to do the screens. That's an existing law, so you can not have a monopoly form. They can limit. But what I wanted was the players to be at the table who have the money. And we also put language in there to say also consider regional auctions so that other players can be at the table as well and have an opportunity to participate. So it's, these are balances you've got to try to achieve. Short answer, I think they can hit that 20 and probably exceed it if they do it right.
Sure. Now, as you obviously know, the FCC is undergoing a significant leadership change right now, but at the same time, it has a lot of work to do to fill in the gaps on the incentive auction and, frankly, a number of other priorities that have been sitting at the commission. What do you think the FCC should do under acting chair Mignon Clyburn? I mean, should it continue to do some of this big legwork on the spectrum auction, or should it wait?
No, I think they should continue. It doesn't mean they make every major decision, but certainly there's so much that's done at the staff level. And first, let me also congratulate her for crashing through the glass ceiling. I mean, it's really impressive. She's an impressive member of the commission. I've worked with her on some issues, and she's very talented, very bright, and I congratulate her on becoming the chairman, or at least until there's a new chairman, Mr. Wheeler, if he's confirmed by the Senate. So yes, I think they should go forward. There's just too much work not to.
Sure. Are you afraid, though, that some of the spectrum auction work might be delayed as the FCC goes through this natural evolution in its leadership?
I suppose it's possible, but as you know, it's just like our committees. There's a lot of work that gets done at the staff level. That's where the heavy lift really occurs, and then it comes up to the commission level. And so I don't think that the staff will be necessarily negatively affected by this. They've got outside consultants they're working with to design the auction. And so I would hope they wouldn't, hit the pause button. We need to meet our deadlines. They need to meet theirs. We need to continue the active oversight and conversation back and forth.
Sure. And one last thing on Clyburn, as she takes over, just in the meantime, as we wait for the next chairman, that could be Wheeler, as you pointed out, should the FCC take a step back and not do anything major while she's in charge, or should Clyburn have all the powers and capabilities afforded to her that
she's in charge? But look, she's going to manage it properly, I think. She's not going to suddenly seize the kingdom and pull up the drawbridge. I mean, she doesn't operate that way. I think she's very thoughtful, and her colleagues on the commission. And so I think they'll continue to move forward. And I think she would be cognizant of the fact you're going to have 2 new commissioners on and probably a new chairman, likely. I mean, certainly. And so I think she'll be thoughtful.
Sure. What are your thoughts on Wheeler? It's pretty much divided, it seems, the telecom community between folks who praise his business experience and some in the public interest world who think he's too closely tied to telecom interests. What do you think about the president's nominee?
First of all, I think he's a very talented, very bright individual who has a great depth on the business side, which I think is important to have on the commission. You need people who have actually been out there and know the realities of these different industries. They're changing so rapidly, they're complex. The part that troubled me were some of the writings he's had going back to 2011, because the work I've done on FCC process reform, where he thinks it's fine to use merger conditions to affect and regulate the market, which I find offensive, frankly, from a public policy standpoint, Because if a commission, whichever commission you want to pick, not just FCC but others, does not have the underlying statutory and therefore regulatory authority to affect the marketplace on its own, it shouldn't use the extraordinary power it has to approve or deny a merger to exercise market changes that it can't do through a regulatory environment. And here's why this is important. Because you've got other players in the market that aren't part of the merger that are going to be subject to whatever the condition is. And that's not really fair to the other participants in the marketplace. And he's written very specifically on this topic that he thinks that's a way to sort of leverage more power to the FCC. If they don't have the underlying authority and therefore regulatory authority, I think it's wrong to have 3 people in effect, the majority of the commission, that could just say, we're going to hold you to this because we can't accomplish it over here, so we'll do it through your merger, and we know you will give. We know you'll give in the end. Some people might call such a strategy extortion because who knows what they're giving up to get something bigger. It's just not good public policy.
Well, Congressman Walden, in a recent speech to the National Association of Broadcasters, you said that you see the FCC has been more concerned lately with expanding its authority than working with us to embed better processes.
Yeah, I think that's, and I mean what I say. I would also quote Blair Levin, who wrote the broadband plan, now over at the Aspen Institute. He said recently the FCC is becoming more of a political institution and less an expert agency. And that's what I think people get concerned about, is when they feel like agencies, whether it's this one or others we're hearing about in the press, seem to have their own agenda and move away from sort of good public policy processes. And I felt that way with the FCC. I've said that there. I felt that way with the merger conditions especially. Now, Julius did a lot of reforms that have been good, and I know he's leaving, and he and I had a good relationship. We didn't always agree, as you know. But he did some good things to reform processes, but he also pushed pretty hard on an agenda that he had. And I'd like to see them get back to being the expert technical agency and not a policy-making body that really gets beyond where Congress is. We're the policy-making body. They should be the expert agency.
Sure. So let's talk about the future of FCC process reform. You guys tried pretty hard last year to advance that legislation. Ultimately, passed the House, didn't get through the Senate. There was a lot of angst over there about the bill. Where do we go from here on that legislation?
We're going to go right back at it. Look, there are those who opposed our effort who think process reform means allowing the Sunshine Act to go forward, which is ironically named, inappropriately named, because it allows commissioners to meet in private and conduct business. I don't know how that's sunshine. I come from a state of Oregon that passed Sunshine Law. It said public officials have to do their business in public. This Sunshine Act says you get to do it in private with some safeguards around it. And I actually could support it if it's connected to other reforms. Look, all we're saying is have shot clocks that you set, predictable timelines, and then if you don't meet them, tell us why you don't meet them. Don't do these enormous data dumps right at the end of a proceeding that nobody really has time to read, understand, and comment on, and then say you have some good public process. I mean, so we're going to move forward. I'm passionate about this, having good processes in government. It's part of why I led the transition team and changed the House rules under Speaker Boehner. I mean, I'm a journalist by training and education, and I think open public process is a good thing in government.
So how do you do it, though? I mean, this became such a political debate last year. Do you start differently? Do you rework the bill from the beginning? What happens?
We haven't made those decisions yet. I'd like to find partners beyond what we had, certainly, and building on what we had to move forward. For the life of me, I can't understand why the Democrats are against the more accountability and transparency at the FCC. And that's all we're saying. You set the timelines, you set the rules, let's codify them. And I tried to make the case, as you know, Tony, to Julius and others, that yes, you did reforms, but I'll tell you what, when you're gone as chair, you could have another chairman come in of a different party or persuasion, or even one like you that has a whole different management style, and all your reforms are gone. Why don't we codify them so they go forward? Because we saw under a certain chairman in the past a pretty dysfunctional FCC develop.
Sure. So any sense of timeline? Do you want to have a bill or a hearing in a certain...
Yeah, we do, but I'm not going to tell you. We've had a lot on our plate. It's on our agenda for this year moving forward. We've also got, of course, the Satellite Home Viewer Act, and we just did these cyber hearings, and I just appointed the work group on supply chain. But it's as you know, both of you, it's a priority for me to get the process.
Why do you
reformed.
refer to the FCC as the friendly candy company?
Oh, it's afraid. My dad got his amateur radio license in 1934. And as a ham radio operator, and then he was in broadcasting all his life as an engineer and owner, operator, and all. And he always just called them Friendly Candy Company. So, the old broadcasters know that's what you did, and I think that had to do with, how you use words for letters. FCC is the Friendly Candy Company.
Well, Representative Walden, you spoke about Stella, the Satellite Television Extension and Localism Act that expires next year.
Right.
What would you like to see done? What's your vision?
It's interesting, Peter. We have people in the marketplace who say, you don't need to do anything, let it expire, the marketplace has changed. And we have people who go, oh no, you got to just reauthorize it very narrowly. And then there's a whole collection of folks who say, oh, I got something that, that's going to be a must-pass bill. Here, add on this, that, and the other thing. So what we've done, I'm kind of a methodical guy on this stuff. So we had a hearing just to set the table and say, what is Stella? Why is it here? What brought it about back to '88 and the advent of satellite and get competition out there? And then where's the marketplace changed? So we'll have another hearing fairly soon, I believe, on this issue, and we're going to continue a very methodical path and look at all the issues and then make some decisions where we go. I haven't honed in on exactly what I'm going to do or what the committee's going to do. It's not just me. But it's the video world is going through enormous change. I think a huge paradigm change right before our eyes with the 2-to-1 decision in the court on the Aereo case, where they can basically download the signal off air, put it up on the internet, and say that's okay. That has huge consequences potentially. And so you've got Aereo doing that just a limited basis in one market, but talking about expanding. You've got satellite providers thinking, well, then we can get around retransmission here. Maybe we'll do that. You got a cable company that said, we'll look at that too. And all of a sudden, the whole business model and marketplace is getting tossed around pretty rapidly.
Well, when it comes to Stella, are you going to try to prevent it from becoming a Christmas tree of legislation?
Yeah, I'm going to have hearings, and we're going to look at all the issues, and we'll see. And my hunch is it ends up being pretty clean act. And again, I prefer to do sort of one thing at a time and not have all these other things, hooked on. But if it's, I don't know, maybe we should that's where we should put process reform. How's that? We could pick up some. I hadn't thought of that. I like this. We could get this done.
Well, you also mentioned the Aereo decision.
Right.
What's your view on that?
I was surprised by the decision.
Were you
really,
supportive?
No,
Did you have an opinion?
Well, I'm an old radio broadcaster, so I'm not a TV guy. But I look at that and think that's a disruptor in the marketplace. Sort of like Hopper's a disruption in the marketplace, and disruptions aren't bad necessarily. But this one really has, I think, much bigger consequences as people are beginning to read into it.
Sure, and just to piggyback off that, as Aereo has progressed through the courts and folks have been reacting to it, you have others like Fox that are talking about pulling their signals just in response. How does that play on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think that's all part of the discussion because, at some point, producers of programming have to have a way to get paid. Or you're going to have programming. I mean, somebody's got to pay the bill, and a lot of that's been through the various financial arrangements among the providers and the TV stations, and all of those very complicated mishmash of laws and rules and legacies and all. And if that goes away, and somebody's taking your product and putting it up on cable for free, basically, then all of a sudden you probably have to look at how you change that model. And that's, I think, what Chase Carey was carefully saying at the NAB in his remarks, and of course it sort of lit up every switchboard in telco world. But I think he didn't say they were going to, but I think this is the point I'm making is you've got everybody sitting back going, now wait a minute, what just happened here with Aereo? What does that mean? And does that mean I get around paying retrans fees? And what do you do if you already have contracts? And if you're the local broadcast provider, what does that mean? I mean, it's I don't think we know all the implications here. And again, everybody's like, okay, a 2-to-1 decision in one court doesn't make this formal everywhere. But
well, in that same NAB speech, you said you're not convinced retransmission consent needs need reforming at this time.
That's true.
Why?
Most of these agreements have been reached now. We want a marketplace that works. That's my sort of fundamental philosophy, whether it's in broadcast, cable, wireless world. I want competitive marketplaces, and I want the marketplace to work. I don't want government coming in unless the marketplace fails. And so here you have most of these retransmission consent agreements have now been signed. I think virtually all of them are, and some of them are now extended out 4 years or 8 years. And so the marketplace has worked in that respect, and I think that's a more efficient way to deal with this than to get into a rate-setting body or have the government create, who's going to get paid what for what. I mean, that to me is not agile, nor a good way to go.
What do you think of John McCain's reintroduction of the a la carte bill?
There's a lot of talk about the pros and cons of a la carte, and certainly some of the smaller cable providers like the notion. I'm not sure it's the panacea that many say or think it is, that suddenly you can just pick the shows you want, or they only have. Because remember, you still have that whole Tier 1 requirement locally, where the broadcast signals are there, and then you go above that. And so there's some, I don't know if he's talking about getting rid of that. And again, you wonder what that does to the pricing model and to the wide range programming that's out there. I mean, there is the trade-off that says with the current system, you get a lot more programming that frankly, and maybe consumers wouldn't want it, but frankly wouldn't exist otherwise, because there wouldn't be the consumer demand probably for it. It gets bundled in and this, that, and the other thing. And so I think you have to be very careful. That would be a real interesting disruptor of the market. And some think it'll be great and work, and others say it would be a disaster and people don't know what they'd be getting into. Suddenly you're going to pay a whole bunch more for the sports programming or some other programming.
Sure. So you mentioned Stella and cybersecurity, so let's talk about cyber. There were those 2 cybersecurity hearings before Energy and Commerce on Tuesday. Talk a little bit about the takeaways from there. Are you happy with what you've heard about the president's executive order focused on critical infrastructure?
Well, it's better than where he started a year or so ago, where he was just against CISPA and all. I think he came a long way. I tell you, Tony, this is the biggest threat America faces. Is cybersecurity threat. And we heard that across the panel. Even panelists who had a little disagreement about what you do about it, I think they all agree this is a very serious problem for the country. And so that's where I think Mike Rogers has done a terrific job as chairman of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and a member of our subcommittee. As you know, I asked him and Anna Eshu to chair a supply chain vulnerability work group, which I've put together several of those over the years to bring members together and dive deep on these issues. Supply chain vulnerability is a big issue for America and for our security, and I think they'll develop a lot of good information for the full subcommittee on it. But going forward, I think it's a matter of trying to figure out how do you determine where there is a vulnerability, perhaps in a specific piece of equipment or a brand or a line of equipment. How do you communicate that? Who makes those decisions? Those aren't easy to figure out, how you get from here to a good housekeeping seal of approval on a piece of equipment. And if you're out there, some of these organizations companies that have been talked about, are price leaders in the marketplace by a significant amount. And so if you're out there trying to build out a little system here or there, there's a big cost differential, which makes it a real incentive to buy that equipment, and yet we have published reports indicating there may be problems with some of that equipment. So,
sure, and specifically on the supply chain working group, do you have an idea of what you want from the group and the timeline under which you want it to operate?
I try not to put too many tight parameters around them. The value of the work group is they can bring in people who might not otherwise be, the companies might not make them available to testify, because then they get whacked with all these other issues. So we can get some real technical experts in. We can go into classified environments, and we can. I think we can find. What I'd like to find is there a way to get to procurement improvement, and figure out where the vulnerabilities really lie, and then what's the most reasonable course of action.
On procurement, just to follow up on that, there's been a lot of talk about requiring government contractors, those sorts of folks, to adhere to a certain set of standards in order to sell to the federal government. It's been pretty controversial from as far as we can tell. What do you think about that process?
I think this gets to the issue of, and literally I know somebody that got one of the grants to build out broadband and putting together a proposal to do it, and then got a call and said, I don't think that equipment's going to be appropriate. And that person then called me and said, well, what's that about? I said, I don't know. We kind of figured it out. And that came out in the hearing that we had. It's like, this is sort of random. There's no standard out there. There's no consistency. It's sort of this random call in the night, if you will. It says, don't do that. And then it's classified. And so we're trying to figure out, how do you have a system in place that's more predictable, understandable, and open?
Representative Walden, just recently the House passed your Internet Freedom Bill. Why did you feel a need for that legislation?
Well, because we didn't do so well in Dubai. I think it was 89 nations believe that there should be, use the old legacy ITU, International Telecommunications Union structure to regulate the Internet. This is legacy authority that's designed to deal with telephone calls over among countries and over copper. I mean, that's kind of where it all started. And you've got some actors out there in countries that probably don't embrace our First Amendment rights and freedoms like we do. And they want control of the Internet through the UN, through the ITU process, I think, in order to be able to control what's going on the Internet. And I don't mean illegal acts. I don't mean, piracy and that sort of thing. I mean looking at your emails and figuring out who's speaking out against the government and tying your IP address to your street address and those sorts of things so that they can suppress speech and all. And the Internet's one of the greatest growth engines in the history of humankind. And so anyway, we didn't do so well there. 89 went against us. I think it was 50-some were for us. As we were voting on that, in Switzerland there was another meeting going on, a precursor to the meeting next year in South Korea. And I just felt, as did my colleagues in the House on a unanimous vote, we needed to take this up to a higher level now and make it the policy of the United States, which puts it in statute, that the multi-stakeholder approach to management of the Internet is the best way to manage the Internet. It's just what's given us this great engine of economic and speech freedom.
So where is that in the legislative process?
So it passed the House 413-0. As you know, there was some concern by some of my Democrat friends that somehow this, taking exactly the same language they all voted for last time, putting it in as a statute somehow might affect the net neutrality issue where we have disagreement. So we backed off. We got language they agreed did not offend that issue, and we moved forward and on a unanimous basis. So I'd be hopeful the Senate would pick it up and pass it. I don't see why they wouldn't.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Pardon me. Greg Walden is chair of the Communications and Technology Subcommittee at Energy and Commerce. Tony Rahm is with Politico. Gentlemen, thanks for being on the Communicators.
Thank you.
C-SPAN, created by America's cable companies in 1979. Brought to you as a public service by your television provider.